Good evening and welcome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Daniel Peabody. I'm a director here at Elizabeth Leach Gallery, and thank you for joining us tonight for our conversation with Michelle Ross and Sarah Sentilles. If you have questions or comments during the course of the conversation, please go ahead and post those in the comment box. And if we have time to answer questions and do a Q&A at the end, we will try to do that as time allows. It is my pleasure to welcome both of our guests this evening. Sarah Sentilles used to live in Portland. I first met Sarah in Portland when she was teaching at PNCA. Before that, she taught at PSU and has had an amazingly accomplished career. I was very impressed with Sarah the first time I met her. Had I known her CV, I would have been even more impressed with degrees from both Yale and Harvard. Pretty impressive. I recently kind of reconnected to her writing through an essay that the Ford Family Foundation commissioned her to write on Michelle Ross for a brochure that'll come out later this year. And it was really nice to read her writing again. You probably have seen her work. One of her most accomplished books is Draw Your Weapon from 2017, which won a PEN America Award for Creative Nonfiction. And this coming May, her new book, Stranger Care, a memoir of loving what isn't ours, will come out, and we're all looking forward to that. Michelle Ross has worked with the gallery and represented by the gallery since 2004, and we've had many incredible shows with Michelle and had amazing work from Michelle for all those years. And just last year, 2020, she did an incredible commission for Standard Insurance, and many of the works in this show relate to that body of work. The current exhibition, obviously, is Michelle Ross, I Am Your Signal, which is on view through March 27th. This is up on view alongside Alexis Day's exhibition, Faceted Time and Expectations, and our print wall with Alison Sarr, which is actually on view through April. So without further ado, I would love to turn the conversation over to Sarah and Michelle to talk about Michelle's exhibition. Welcome, everyone. And again, if you have comments, please go ahead and put them in the comment chat. Michelle,
hi.
Sarah, hi.
Thanks, Daniel.
Hi, Michelle. I'm so happy to be here. It feels like I'm back in Portland. Daniel, that was the nicest introduction ever. It's so much better than when people just read your bio off the website. It really felt nice. So thank you for that. And thanks, Michelle, for inviting me to do this. Do you want me just to start asking you questions, or you want to say something first?
That's a good question. No, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Daniel, thank you for the introduction. And yes, I'm thrilled to get to have this conversation with you, Sarah, all the way you're zooming in from Idaho. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So my first question is just about kind of, here we are in a pandemic. We are experiencing another wave of anti-racist protests against racism in our country. And you have talked about how these paintings were made when the election was really beginning to ramp up. And you found yourself, like all of us, I think, glued to the television as if like our attention could do something about the state of the world. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about how everything that's happening in the world, how that seeps into your studio and into your work, and what is the relationship between current events, the traumas of these last 4 years, and what's happening in your studio.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Well, it's a great question. It might not be like immediately apparent, but I do think one of the things about the paintings that they telegraph is this kind of very turbulent collision of surfaces, and try as I might to calm them down and to try to be calm and embody calmness. It really, infinitely divisible painting. Yeah, there we go. And the title also kind of refers to that, but there's this sort of turbulence going on, and working on these paintings became a way to channel and reflect and try to subdue some of that anxiety. And I think that it was like I was absorbing all that. I mean, I did the like horrible thing of having the news actually on my screen in the studio, which I've never done before. Because it was the election, it was the insurrection, it was all the protests that were going on, the racial reckoning, it was the news cycles, the pandemic surges. And I was, every day, daily, like asking myself, what, is this important to be doing? And so I think the paintings, again, the surfaces really sort of reflect that. And then also this really interesting sort of focus became the peripheries. So, and it's kind of evident in this painting as well. It's like I began really pushing out to the edge and really thinking about questioning the center. And that's just sort of metaphorical to, the idea that maybe we should question, what is centered, what has been centered and what is centered. So, yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. I hadn't really thought about your paintings as questioning the periphery, but if you think about them, they don't really have a center. It's kind of like where the viewer gets to choose where the importance is. I mean, you direct us in some ways, but that's really interesting.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. And that's a detail of like one of the peripheries right there.
It's beautiful. I love the details. I love to get to see them since we can't be in the gallery. But, I'm a writer and I used to be a painter. We were talking before we started, I used to be a bad painter, but I loved painting. And I'm really fascinated by the relationship between word and image. And I think you do really interesting things by bringing together titles and image. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your use of language and your titling and what you hope that language might do or reveal in connection with your paintings.
Yeah. Thanks for that too, because, I'm actually a real wannabe writer. Hopefully before my time on the planet is over with, I'll be able to pursue that a little bit more rigorously. But so I end up, kind of incorporating it in different ways. I mean, the first thing I could say about this exhibition is that the title of the exhibition, I Am Your Signal, was a phrase that just kind of came to my mind when I was working in the studio about a year ago, well before these works were made. And I really began thinking about that as almost like the voice of the painting, or the voice, as sort of an adjacent address. And so I think about the titles that way as well. So there's the address of the visual vocabulary and what's going on visually and formally with these abstractions. And then I think of the titles as an opportunity to give this kind of adjacent address. And I think it also, what it does is it for viewers, I believe, I hope that it provides a kind of territory or a kind of context for what I'm thinking about with the work. And I'm usually thinking about it during and afterwards rather than before I set out to make the work. So language also really serves as a tool for me to understand what I'm doing, especially kind of after the fact, upon reflection. And I mean, it really, like the title of this painting, False Flag, it came to me kind of very much at the end. Actually, a good friend of mine, Heather Watkins. Hi, Heather, if you're out there.
Hi, Heather.
I don't know if you're out there, but she had done a virtual studio visit and thought that the beginnings saw these paintings in the beginnings stages and thought that they sort of, her association was flags. And then I started thinking about banners, and then I started thinking about like all the things that people are carrying around on all sides of the political spectrum and how they function and how they don't function. And and so False Flag became, and this painting, I'll talk about, I think I might be talking about this painting a little bit later, but this painting was really confusing to me. Like it started out being, it sort of wanted symmetry. It sort of wanted to be symmetrical. It sort of was sort of looking maybe flaggish after that Heather had made that suggestion. And the confusion and the kind of subterfuge that I felt like was going on with this painting became a way, just made me think of False Flag and all of this sort of confusion and subterfuge and like sort of backwards thinking that was going on. They called the insurrection a false flag. And, so anyway, there's a lot of, trouble going on in this painting.
It's interesting that you say voice of the painting. So I wonder, like, is the title what the painting is saying? Like, is the title its voice, or is that something else? And because it reminds me, Pat Boas, who's in your area of the country, she has a new show here in Sun Valley called Silent Sentinels, about the banners held by suffragettes.
Oh yeah.
In some ways. And so, like, there's a way where the flags become, it depends who's holding them and for what purpose. So I think that's interesting to think about. What are these silent beings saying?
Yeah. And how well are they functioning? Again, I feel like in some cases this is a failed sort of flag because it's way too complex to signal anything really understandable and clear. There's a lot of different sort of mixed signals going on, I think. Yeah.
I think that's a good transition for my next question. So, as a writer, I'm really interested, and as a person who studied religion for like way too many years, I'm really interested in questions of transcendence and kind of the failures of representations. And I think, as a writer, I always want to represent on the page that the people and the beings that I'm writing about somehow elude my ability to capture them, that there's always more to those people or those beings than what I can put on the page. And I think you're doing something similar in these paintings, and you think a lot about, I know, issues of invisibility and the contradictions of making the invisible visible. You said to me once, there is always something unseen, unperceived, covered, camouflaged, hidden. Why? And how do you make images with that in mind? So can you talk about how invisibility works in your paintings?
Yeah, well, it's kind of another paradox in a way, because, obviously these are very visible and they're very, in some cases quite saturated with color. And, but I think a lot about responding to an atmosphere, or thinking about creating an atmosphere, or not so much creating, but responding to the atmosphere that arises with the manipulation of the materials. So there's all these different ways that I'm manipulating the materials. There's dissolution, there's the gathering of all these particles, there's flowing and coagulation and demarcation. And I feel like those are all forces that suggest but don't depict a presence. So like letting the material behave as it wants to behave, and then also me sort of corralling that and demarcating that. It sort of builds up to this like atmosphere or space where I imagine, those presences may be, willing to sort of not be visible, but be present, like, have a sort of presence without being depicted. It's almost like conjuring an environment that would allow for glimpses or clues to apprehending that which is not immediately apparent. So it's more like giving clues. I think the analogy that I gave to you one time when we were talking was like, like, just imagine the invisible person walked in the door and you threw the sheet over it, and then you can see its form, kind of. It's something like that, but not exactly that.
So what motivates you to have the invisible form with the sheet over it rather than having a portrait? What's going on there for you?
Yeah. Well, that kind of gets into some thinking about like the problems of representation, in terms of like, if what I see is forces and atmospheres and suggestions and inferences, then I have to, as the maker, but also maybe as the viewer, then I have to decide. I have to come to some conclusions, or I have to be willing to stay in that not knowing place. And so I think my association with invisibility is also an association with, or the way that I think about it, or the way that I allow for it is its association with unknowing and uncertainty. And we have just all been living with so much of that, you know, in the past year for sure, but like for different people for decades, right? Like, you know, how do we make peace with that which is not immediately apprehendable?
That's such a good question. You know, it reminds me of my mentor, which if there's any PNCA students on here, they've heard me say like 5,000 times. Gordon Kaufman is his name. He's died, but he always said the most ethical thing I can say is I might be wrong. Because that means, it doesn't mean I can't stake my life on my beliefs, but it does mean I won't kill anyone else over them. And I think you're getting at that idea a little bit about like, how do you introduce doubt, uncertainty, unknowability, invisibility, all of those things. For me, those things are connected to transcendence, the idea that there's something to every being that is beyond our ability to know and understand, and that it's our job to care for that part, that very part that we don't know and can't see. And I think your paintings are really, really getting at that.
Well, I'll just say one more thing about that. I mean, I came up with a lot of Mormon theology. I'm not Mormon, but my family, you know, parts of my family were. And so those ideas of unseen presences and forces and that which is acting upon us that we might not, you know, be able to see, it was something that was impressed upon me at a very early age. And like as a kid, you're not really thinking about theology. You're just thinking about the magic of that thought. So
yeah, you're trying to make sense of it, make sense of it in the world as you know it with the words that you know. I mean, that's all we have is human words to try, and the paint that we use. So let's talk a little bit about paintings and your body. You've shared with me a little bit about how physical the act of making is for you. You talked about when something's small, you're holding it close to your body, and when something's big, you're kind of figuring out how to move around it. But you also said this thing, which I thought was really beautiful. The painting becomes really close to my body. It's ineffable. It is almost like an imprint that is not an imprint of me, of Michelle-ness, my sensibility, my desire to see certain colors, certain relationships. So I'm wondering if you could talk about this imprint and how we might see it in this painting that's on the screen now.
Yeah, that, you know, it's interesting thinking about the imprint. It almost sounds like, you know, I'm like the Eve's Klein thing where I'm like laying down. I'm not doing that, but it is sort of, I mean, I think of it more as like, that the painting kind of ends up standing as a gestalt of that series of traces. So the body, my hand, I mean, this painting is really pretty big. And at times I worked on it flat on the ground. And I thank God have a decent yoga practice, because there were times in order to reach into the middle of it, you know, I really had to stretch, and I really had to like straddle these things and hope that I didn't fall into it. And so there's this physicality, this one with the big ones, but also with the smaller ones, you know, as I'm holding them closer to me. It's this set of decisions that are directly manifested through my body. And it's not an uncommon thing. I'm sure, you know, a lot of artists can relate to this and would maybe say the similar thing about the relationship to their work to their body, because it's necessary. You need your body, I mean, to make physical works. But again, the idea that these traces, these physically manifested traces in the form of a patch of green, or you know, a swath of silver, or a drawn line that has a different a drawn line that requires something different of my body than you know, kind of pouring and moving with a hand or another tool. All those things are just like accumulated into this, like what I said, this gestalt that hopefully, you know, holds together as this whole kind of experience. And it's not that I would expect anyone to, you know, the X people were all, you know, very much about like this gesture being a kind of a sort of reflection of their bodily experience. But I think it feels different now, and in terms of what kind of access women, BIPOC, queer folks have had to that sort of mythology about your body and the traces you're leaving, and who's looking at that. So yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's like you can, I can't point to any place in this painting where, you might see a trace, but like it all adds up. There's all tiny traces that all add up, I think.
So you're talking a little bit about like the accumulated gestures of your body forming some kind of sense of yourself that only you could make this in this particular way. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Actually, that's a very succinct clarification.
No, I was just listening to what you said. I couldn't have said it otherwise. Yeah. But how? So you then at the end you talked about how it's like that those kinds of gestures or that kind of mark making has only been available to a limited set of people. Is that also what? So that the act of making itself is a political act when you're occupying your particular body.
I mean, I think so. I believe that. I think it's a different kind of, it's a different kind of agency than self-representation. So like, and I spoke about this last time on the first Thursday, but like, I'm not like, I love a lot of representational works, figurative works. It's really strong right now. A lot of folks, BIPOC folks, queer, indigenous folks that, are representing themselves and their experience and their bodies. And that's so important because in the canon that has been left out. But I feel like also the territory of abstraction allows for a different kind of demarcation or imprint or set of traces that add up to a visual experience that is singular and subjective.
That's a great transition into this other question I wanted to ask you about this article that you had me read that I got obsessed with by David Getze. Is that how you say his last name, Getze?
I think so.
I just did the audiobook for Stranger Care and realized I don't say anybody's name correctly that I read. I just say them in my head. I make up some way to say people's names. But anyway, I became obsessed with his essay, with Getze's essay, 10 Queer Theses on Abstraction.
Yeah.
And he talks about abstraction as what he calls a queer tactic or a way out of the problems of representation that I think you were alluding to before, like sexism, racism, heterosexism, ableism, on and on and on. And that instead he's trying to create this hidden space where this space of resistance where people can be free. I think what happened a lot this summer, thinking about Black Lives Matter and still thinking about it, is how what racism is largely visible. It depends on the visible. We sort bodies by how we're trained to see bodies. And that there's this hypervisibility that comes with being a person of color. And then there's also invisibility at the same time. And that's true for women as well. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how that refusal to be seen or that kind of abstraction becomes kind of a political act and how that might inform how you think about what it means to be an abstract artist.
It's very much about questioning or thinking about the problems of representation, like you just really nicely kind of laid out. I think, for me personally, making this work, when I was in graduate school in the 90s, I felt pressure to represent myself, my body, my queerness, my relationships, narratives, and I didn't want to. I was more interested in the kinds of relationality that happens between form and color, and between space and form, and between marks and pores and materiality and all of that. And so those relations that are happening can be seen as analogous to the kinds of relations that happen between bodies, the kinds of relations that happen between minds, the kinds of relations that happen in society. So for example, looking at this body of work, there's a lot of paintings where you see a focus on, or you can tune into these relations. So it's between forms and colors. There's pressures, there's tensions, there's tendernesses. The tenderness in this painting is that little pink kind of spot there. There's divisions, there's proximities, there's approaching, there's retreating. And so those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. Again, not like ahead of time, but I'm aware of those kind of operations. And I'm looking at how those ideas, that list I just gave, is actually, a way to think about what happens again between people. And I don't, it's like, I wouldn't say that this painting, I mean, it's like creating worlds in which you can sort of act out or think about, again, those pressures. And I go back to the example of the periphery. So, I wrote in the artist statement thinking about the periphery as this really important place. Like where, we talk a lot about what's centered, what needs to be centered, and what might be just slightly out of our understanding of the center, how that might be focused on. And I wrote in my artist statement, I work hard to find and inscribe a faceted oppositional periphery that challenges a dissolving, unreliable center. In a lot of the paintings, I was working hard to just try to, leave the center kind of unknowable. I mean, this bathysphere actually has this really kind of stacked, strong central form, but then it's intersected and interrupted by that silver and white bar. And so interruption would be maybe another word that I would add to that list.
That's your list of words is really good. I think you do have a future ahead of you as a writer. We can switch. You can come sit at my boring desk and I'll come sit in your gorgeous studio. Yes. We can see what happens.
Let's try.
But, I think I wrote this essay like a few years ago about Lynn Woods Turner's work, and she's an abstract artist, and I was trying to work out the way that I really am convinced that abstract art is political art, and I think Getsy's article helps with that. But the way I was thinking about it is that it demands careful looking, right? Because you can't assimilate. You can't just say, "Oh, I know what that is. That's a bear. That's a tree. That's a body."
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it just seems like there's always more than you can see. It's always different than what you might think you see. You can never see the whole thing. The person next to you might see something different. And I think it just reminds me in that way that all making is political making, even if it's not explicitly political content. And I think you're so good at talking about that.
Thank you. I mean, the other thing I think of, and again, this is not at all, a disrespect of representation, but especially towards those who have been left out of the, the space to represent themselves. But I think representation can also be conceived of as a kind of power over and a kind of capturing, whereas the queering of abstraction can harness that's what's latent in us, and things like associations and memories and what you just described, the kind of complexity of not having a fixed representation that then stands for everything in that category. I think ideally it breeds tolerance. I mean, I don't know how to test that.
I feel more tolerant having spent time thinking about your artwork. So you have a subject group of one and,
awesome.
And 100% success rate.
Yay.
So I want to bring our conversation a little bit to landscape. I live in the mountains of Idaho. I moved here to be in this landscape. It's so beautiful. It's been such good medicine for me. And I think some of these paintings read like landscapes or suggest landscapes. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the relationship between your work and landscapes and how you think about that.
Yeah, when as an undergraduate and in grad school, I was always kind of flirting with the landscape. And I think that comes from, my first early childhood spent in Utah, and some of my earliest childhood memories were of literally just like vast amounts of sky, the Wasatch Range, the Great Salt Lake, so all of that was kind of, I would say, my original environment. And, at the same time, like we were just talking about representation, it's like, I'm much more interested in the inference of forces that you might experience, through weather or through, being really close to a particular piece of land, like a piece of land that you return to. Right now I'm actually honestly really involved in my little own plot of land and growing things and sustaining things. And so, I think, again, what I'm trying to do is suggest and infer. The sky, I did write this on a list of things getting ready to talk about this show, is that every day the sky is just an enormous inspiration to me. I think about the forces that exist to create weather. And then that leads me to also be thinking about the problems that we're, facing at this point. But that painting that now we're seeing a detail of, I'm also thinking about this sort of, again, how geometry is used to break up and plot up and control land, not only land, but, geographies, people. And so I think that there's a sort of a dance and a tension going on between the geometry and the forces of the material that I'm using, that kind of point to that trouble, that sort of, they're not bucolic landscapes, although I do have a painting coming up, I think, that we're going to look at, that's called Idlewild, that is a little bit bucolic. Yes, there it is. And, again, it's like, it is a sort of active, disturbed, sort of divided up surface in a way. But I think there's also, as in any, good experience of the land, there's also places. Well, first of all, it's difficult to you're a hiker, it's like, it's not always easy, to experience these places the deeper we get into the wilderness. And so, there's sort of the loveliness of it and the beauty of it, but then there's also the challenge of it. And, again, I'm not depicting those things, but those are the things that are kind of on my mind when I realize that something's emerging that feels land, scape-ish.
That's interesting, because I've been sitting with a deeper tension in my own relationship with the land. Where I live is Shoshone-Bannock land, stolen land, and this land has been such a balm for me. And I also live within 3 hours of the biggest massacre of Native American people, of indigenous people in history. There's no marker there or anything, so when you're talking about borders, I all of a sudden I was like, oh, I could see your work differently, looking at borders or interruptions or marking, and kind of throwing that up in the air and seeing where it lands differently kind of captures that idea of all territory is unceded territory, or is one of my friends is a poet, Katie Ford, and she said if we I'm butchering it, but she said something, if we didn't walk where there were bones of the dead, we couldn't walk anywhere. And so that kind of sense as well.
Yeah. There's all kinds of, like this painting, well, the title might suggest, a very idyllic kind of experience on a very lovely day, partly because of the color and those blues and that, like a cool morning, perfect summer day, maybe, you know, it's got these, you know, hard form, you know, these divisions, these borders, these hard forms that are kind of, you know, breaking, breaking it up. So yeah.
This was the painting we were going to talk about fabric with, I think. And I've been thinking a lot ever since you talked about this idea that you had this project in the back of your mind about making garments for the invisible, and how you use fabric like cloth, scraps, leftovers, used paint rags. And you've talked to me about fabric being a liminal boundary of some kind. For me, it always feels like when you put the fabric on there, like you're tending your paintings. You used the word tending earlier, which I think is such a beautiful word, or swaddling them, or, you know, wrapping them or protecting them in some way. Could you just talk about your use of fabric generally and in this particular painting as well?
You know, I've, again, sort of a frustrated, you know, seamstress, sewer, came up with, you know, a long line of Mormon quilters. And, I think, I mean, first and foremost, it is definitely a kind of reparative act in general, not so much with this body of work, but I've done other bodies of work that are literally a series titled the Redress series. And that is a real reparative kind of gesture and act towards paintings that won't behave, you know, won't actually just fall apart. You know, it's like, if you can fix it at all, you might be able to fix it by swaddling it or quilting it or upholstering it. And I think the gallery has a couple of those series left, but with this body of work, I mean, textiles are, they're sort of two things at once. They are this liminal surface. I think of this plane of, textile is amazing. It's like this two-dimensional plane that's been woven. In this painting, you can see on the right, there's a kind of a diagonal grid. That's a piece of actual vinyl on the backside that you cannot see because it's glued down. And then it had this kind of linen kind of texture on the back, which is what you see on the right. And then down at the bottom, there's actually a piece of artist canvas that's on there. But this idea that this plane is it can move in space, it can take any kind of direction. And then what I did with this body of work was I actually just used it as a first kind of grounding shape to respond to. And so in this painting and a few of the others in the exhibition, the fabric went down first as like a grounding plane, something to respond to, something to come up against, something to I mean, it doesn't really, you know, it covers, but it also reveals at the same time. And so there's a concealment, you know, what's on the other side of it or what's underneath it. And so I'm interested, I mean, that kind of circles back to some of the ideas around invisibility, what's seen and what's not seen. The other bodies of work I've done with textiles have been what I call unsupported paintings, meaning they're just hanging against the wall, and they don't have a rigid structure like a panel like these, or a stretcher bar. And the garments for the invisible, it will come someday, but it's, you know, it sort of goes back to the sheet over the, you know, the
ghost,
a figure, you know, the invisible presence, you know, and who are we to say that it's even a human? It's like, what is, like, if you could, like, fabric might be the thing that might be the mediator between that which we can't, you know, immediately apprehend visibly, and but that's there. I think about the textile that way a lot. And then of course all of the like amazing, you know, human invention with textiles, like fashion and our clothing and, you know, all the other things. The thing about it too is, like, I've constructed this very, you know, imaginative, you know, this space, I've invented this world, or this, you know, atmospheric, you know, condition that I've invented. And the fabric the textiles in these pieces, this body of work, for me, were like still kind of a tether to realness, like here-ness, like nowness and here-ness. And I think that's much more evident when you're in front of them. I mean, they're assimilated into that world, the pieces of fabric, but they also, when you realize they're there, there's kind of this recognition like, oh, that's of this world. So maybe,
more than paint. So how is fabric more of this world than paint?
Well, the world, I mean, if you're looking at and I think these paintings do ask you to look at the paint as paint, but I think there's also a place where I've seen a lot of people just say, I just want to go in there.
Oh, okay. So it's like a barrier. It's like a barrier or a shade or something like that. So it disrupts. It's almost like when an actor looks right at the camera or something, and you become aware of that. Is that what you mean?
Maybe. Yeah. I think it's like, well, it's that liminal thing again. Like if that's a space you could go into, and this painting may not be the best example, but like if you kind of zoom into that blue, the pieces of fabric that are there, if you're standing in front of it, kind of
pull you back
out.
Okay.
And so but I think the paint itself is also engaging in that, is participating in that. I guess what Hans Hofmann would call that push-pull, although I don't think I'm doing it the way he does it.
Because the lines do that too. I mean, it's like a surface depth kind of thing, maybe is a little bit, or like in a screen in some kind of way.
Yeah. It's complicated.
I like it a lot. I think how you described fabric is really beautiful. As this like superpower material that's able to do things that other things can't. It made me think of like fabric is like water, the equivalent of water in the physical world. Like it could be ice, it could be river, it could be rain.
It can take what I mean. Maybe that's my tether to it as well. Is it can take any form you want to, whether it's a two-dimensional, surface, like is how it's behaving here, or whether you construct a three-dimensional form with it. And it is interesting to think about it like water. Yeah,
it's fascinating. Okay, so then you've also talked about creating that when you're painting, you create visual problems and you solve them. So I'm wondering if you could walk us through using this painting keep, which might be one of my most favorite words in the English language. If talk us through the visual problems that you set up for yourself and how you solved them, or didn't solve them, or let them be unresolvable.
So this is also one of those kind of intermediate size pieces that the fabric went down first, and there's a Korean hemp linen up in the kind of upper right quadrant, gosh, I'm forgetting where the other fab, maybe it was just that piece, and the steps I took were like having to respond to the fabric initially, and then silver leaf went down. So there's like a square of silver leaf up in the upper left-hand corner. And actually, if I said left for the Korean hemp, I meant the right-hand quadrant. And those things went down first, and they were just really dominant. And I didn't know how, I was going to counter that dominance. And this is another painting that wanted to, like, it flirted with symmetry. It's like, am I going to make a symmetrical painting? I've never done that before. I'm not interested in that kind of predictability, although I am interested in folding. And so I kind of danced back and forth between how I was going to address that fabric, because it's just beautiful on its own. It's like it should have just stopped right there, and I shouldn't do anything to it. And so then what happened was the silver leaf went down, and then it was just like good on its own. And so then what happened is like, okay, how do I create a conversation now between these really different surfaces and really different elements? and we haven't really talked about the silver at all yet, but there's a lot of silver in this show. There's a lot of silver leaf. And one of the things that I love about it is there's silver paint, there's silver oil paint and spray paint. And one of the things I love about the silver, it has also its own set of associations that then became in dialogue with the fabric. And those are, a silver is like a healing kind of metal. It's also super problematic in terms of it being obviously part of the extraction economy, but it's also associated with the moon and the feminine. And so, I wish I was the kind of painter that could have just stopped in that early stage. This became very complicated to sort out, and it's finally started to come together when I poured the pink, the two different pours of pink, and this is actually one that's not so much focused on the periphery, and maybe that was the problem with this one for me, is it really wanted to kind of coagulate in the center, and it became the title Keep is actually a reference to the tallest tower in a like a castle, like a medieval sort of fortress space. The keep is, but it also of course means to keep and to hold. So this painting remains the one, I mean, it is one of my favorites too, but it's very disorienting. And there's, it has to do with the way that I shaved those diagonals on the periphery. And when you stand in the gallery and look at it, I swear it's not level. And I know that the gallery staff made sure that it was level. But so it's this very active, like it never really settled down. And so those were the problems that I was dealing with this painting. And I was unsure about it until I think the very, very end, which was, I can't really remember what the last move. Oh, the last move was that sort of mint color green at the top on the right. I covered up more of the fabric.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you use that word disorienting, and oh, now we can see it up close. Use that word disorienting, and we talked about that maybe a year ago when we were talking about that catalog essay, and you were thinking about the standard insurance. That's where they are, right? Standard, those big paintings, and you were saying about you want the viewer to never know whether they are collapsing or being built. I think is kind of like, and so talk about that a little bit. That idea.
Yeah, it's this idea of an unstable structure. It's this idea that we, we put, well, I mean, I trust the engineers that, constructed that building that those paintings are in. But it is kind of amazing to think about as a metaphor. So we have, human capacity, and technology has, we have the capacity to make these skyscrapers and send, satellites into space. So those are obviously very stable structures, but I think it's a metaphor also for the kinds of structures social structures that we build up around us, and like whether it's time to dismantle some of them again, whether it's time to look at the periphery, to look at the supporting structures that are propping up the unstable structure in the center that's all of a sudden maybe shouldn't be in the center. And I think metaphorically in an analog way, again, as these paintings are coming into being, not like, oh, I want to make some paintings about unstable structures, because then I would be afraid I would just, kind of ham-fistedly illustrate that.
Yeah.
But it occurred to me that that's what these are, and that's what the works at the standard are. It's not really clear, how the form is going to resolve, how it's going to become stable, if it will become stable.
That's fascinating. And this is my last question that I have for you. And I think there are a lot of questions in the chat. I don't know what, I'm not in charge of that, and I feel grateful. But I see lots of people who I know and love in the chat as well. But I love the way that you, this is connected to this kind of instability and not really knowing what's happening. I love the way that you embrace doubt and mystery in your work. And you told me once that you never really completely understand anything that you make. And I think that's so profoundly beautiful and for me, that's a very ethical stand to take. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what role doubt plays in your practice.
Thank you for that question. I mean, I can only really talk about this now that I'm of a certain age, because I think I hear it with students all the time, and I see students be really, and young artists be really kind of undone by their relationship to doubt. And it's not confident, it's not confidence. And what I would say is I want to be confident in my relationship to doubt.
Yeah.
Because I think what it does for me is what I'm actively doing, what I'm actively, experiencing. And mostly, this comes with age. This is maybe one of those kind of little things, wisdoms that come with age, is learning to understand doubt's role as both a motivator and a reminder of I'm thinking about the multiverse, meaning like, realizing that the doubt is just a signal that any other decision might have been made, and it might have been a better decision.
Oh, that's profound.
Or it might have been a worse decision. And these paintings, just like, again, these physical manifestations of that accumulation of decisions. And, this idea of the multiverse, which is like, physics, theoretical physics stuff that I like to read sometimes, is like, there's like 11 dimensions, and there's everything that could be happening at once. And so that fascinates me. And I think of the paintings as this sort of accretion of those possibilities. And if I doubt the goodness of it, I mean, doubting the goodness of it is almost just, like sort of pointless, although I do want them to be, but compelling. So the painting is kind of a transcription of negotiating doubt, and this painting I asked them to include during, for the thinking about doubt, because it's kind of a mess. Like, if you can stand in front of it, like it's a very unlovely surface. There's some really weird, violet down there. There's a lot of kind of gray, like black and white gray, that I don't tend to use. And I almost didn't let this one out of the studio. And it's called Scribed because actually this is one of the more literal titles, because it sort of reminds me of a mangled envelope. I actually got a real mangled envelope in the mail recently. That was sad, because I was able to kind of get out of the envelope what needed, but it was just like a failure, kind of.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. I'm reading George Saunders' new book on craft, on writing, called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. It's magnificent, but he reframes, like I was thinking about your students, he reframes a lot of the things that we carry with ourselves as artists that get in our way, like imposter syndrome, for example, in positive terms. And it reminds me of what you just said. So he says imposter syndrome is actually respect for the craft, and knowing that there's still always more to learn, and you can always do better, and you want to push in some kind of way. And I like that idea of doubt, of reframing doubt as exactly what you should be going for, because it will make you a better painter.
It's the motivation to return.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Here comes Daniel.
What a great conversation. This has been really, really fun to listen to. And it's so interesting that you said that you almost didn't let Scribed into the show, because that would not be, not that any of them would be ones I wouldn't put in the show. They're all stunning, but I hope it didn't hear you talking about it that way.
Probably going to start talking back to us now.
There are some great questions and comments. Maybe one of them, the first questions I'm going to pass along if we have a few minutes. We just have a couple more minutes that we can do questions. Sarah Abbott asked Michelle the question, if you could speak a little bit to the color palette in the body of work, and talk a little bit about some of the color choices.
Sure. I'm trying to think of it. It feels to me like it's one of the most highly saturated bodies of work I've done. But at the same time, I was really engaged with a range of blues, some colors, some pigments that I hadn't worked with before, like Williamsburg's indigo. And so, yeah, the big painting on the left there, there's like 4 or 5 different blues, and the blues and the silver, I was really kind of negotiating how to be in the darkness. That was, I started these paintings. Well, I started many of them last January, February, but then put them away for about 6 months and then returned to them in November. And that's when it's been a year of, darkness in a way. And so I was really trying to figure out a way to work with some of that darkness, but also infuse it with the reflectivity and the light of the silvers. Pinks are always kind of a go-to to me. I have a relationship with pink that I think of pink as an irritant. It's also a very tender color, but it's also something that really, people have strong opinions about. And so I like to leverage it that way. So that's, some of what I was thinking about.
There are a lot of great comments. Mostly comments. One, Kristen Poole, when you guys were talking about abstraction and David Getsy's writing, Kristen Poole commented about how abstraction can sometimes be a barrier. And I think that was in the context of that particular question. I don't know if we want to go back to that or not. But also Stephanie Snyder asked a question about the work still feels related to patterning, and wondered what your thoughts were about patterns as boundaries.
That's interesting. That's thank you, Stephanie.
About patterns as boundaries changed. Excuse me.
Your thoughts about well, I also, pattern is also something I resist. Like, it's related to symmetry, and I actually really want to be that artist that could just like meditate into the repetition. I feel like one of my failings is not having a relationship with repetition, and so that's related to pattern. And I feel like these are on the verge of it. I feel like False Flag also wanted to have some repetition happening in it. And so there's some things going on in the studio right now that are actually me testing some of that way of thinking. But I think that, the boundaries, remain sort of irregular, and, not resolving into any kind of, understandable pattern yet.
Michael Lazarus actually had a question for Michelle. He says, hi, but he also wanted to know if your relationship to the paintings have changed now that they've entered the public space instead of just the studio space, or the studio space.
Yes, that always happens. I mean, these went out really, really, really close to their completion, which was uncomfortable, honestly. But my studio is not that big. I mean, it's about 400 square feet. And so working on these large ones, I was really immersed in them. And so having them out in the space, it's in the gallery space, I feel less of that sense of immersion. And I feel more, I'm able to understand the forms not quite forming better in this larger space. And so I can see them differently, I guess, because they're in a bigger space. But I'm also, they're done. So I'm done. And so I'm like, they're like out, they're gone, and the show will be down soon. So they'll really be gone. And hopefully they'll find homes, but just, I feel less attached to them, less involved with them. I'm happy for them to be out there. But I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of an interesting question, Michael.
The show is not quite done, but there is still another week and a half. The show closes on March 27th is the final day. And a few of them have found homes, but there's a few more. So come on down and see them in person by appointment or a knock at the door. Sarah, thank you so much for doing this. Michelle, thank you so much for doing this.
Great.
Sarah, do you want to take a minute or two and say a little bit about your book coming out in May, Stranger Care?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Do you want to just say a few words about that?
Sure. Stranger Care. It's called Stranger Care, a memoir of loving what isn't ours. And I wrote it as a love letter to our foster daughter. I wanted to be able to mother her when I knew I would no longer be able to. And I was, when my friends got the feeling that she was going to leave, they brought us books. They just piled them on our porch and in our living room. And they wanted to build her a library so that if she couldn't have us as a forever home, she could have stories to light her way. And so I'm hoping that this book is a book that will light the way for people and help us all remember that we belong to each other and that we're always already home.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's a happy book.
Well, I very much look forward to reading it, as I know do many. So
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you so much for your time today. And Michelle, thank you so much for these incredible paintings. And there's some people on the chat thanking you guys for this, or the two of you for this conversation as well. I want to thank the audience for being here. I think with that, we can probably say good night. But please, before you, the two of you, before you log off, please do notice the comments. Some of them are saved because they're from. This is a good place to see them because they come from multiple platforms. So they're not all going to show up when you go look at YouTube or go look at Facebook later. So, but anyway, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I'm so enjoying living with the show. I feel really lucky that we've been able to have it up here in the gallery for 2 months, and it's up for just another week and a half. So if you've tuned in tonight and you haven't been able to see it yet, please try to come by and see it. And Sarah, thank you so much for the conversation. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Daniel. Bye.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.